QB1 or QB none. With a major shift of Mel Kiper's big board, he and Field Yates are here to tell us which quarterbacks have separated themselves from the pack. Plus, we're responding to your questions, your takes, and your draft dreams live. The First Draft Podcast starts right now. Hi, everybody, and welcome to First Draft. They are Mel and Field, as always, and they're the ones you want to hear from. You hear us every week this college football season, Thursday afternoons, live on the NFL on ESPN YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts, with a reminder that Mel's big board is out now on ESPN.com and updated every Friday. Guys, before we get into our day one names you need to know, part two, which is going to be one of the big themes today, football starts and ends with the quarterback. We have talked plenty about this year's crop of QBs, but Field, you made an interesting statement in pre-show discussions. You claim there is a distinct separation amongst the top five quarterbacks on your board from Mel's big board. Who leads the pack, Field, and why?
I think we're starting to see some separation from two players and the rest of the quarterbacks behind them. I think the best quarterback in college football amongst the draft-eligible players this year has been Shedeur Sanders. Colorado, 6-2. Another impressive victory this past weekend. Shedeur Sanders, who, as we know, has the worst offensive line of any of the quarterback prospects that we are discussing. Yes, he has the best wide receiver of any of the quarterback prospects that we are discussing, but continues to get the job done. This guy is surgical as a passer when he has time and space. But I've been very impressed with Colorado's 6-2 start this season. They are looking like the team that we thought we saw at the beginning of last year. I think Shedeur Sanders, quarterback one. I think Cam Ward of Miami, still undefeated, by the way, very much in the race for a playoff spot, and perhaps the ACC champions as well this year. Looks like quarterback two to me. Cam Ward has been playing better football this year in Miami than he did at either stop prior in his college career. He continues to be trending up. And then I think we have a case of the other three quarterbacks who are either just sort of treading water or maybe going down. In the case of Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, I think their stock compared to where it was going into the season is down. We were talking about Carson Beck as potentially the number one overall player in the entire class in 2025. I said this to Mel before the show. I'm not sure that as of right now, he's even a first-round pick. Quinn Ewers, same case. Jalen Milroe, a slightly different case, only because he didn't come into the season with, hey, this guy is an unimpeachable first-round pick. But after that incredible performance against Georgia, it has not been nearly as dominant from Jalen Milroe or the rest of this Alabama team. He might be a guy that, if he decides to declare for the draft this year, is also not a first-round pick. I know that quarterbacks are always going to be the position that we pay more attention to during the pre-draft cycle. And the caliber of the quarterback class in many ways will determine the level of interest in the NFL draft. I'm not convinced that we have a banner year upon us with these quarterbacks. As a matter of fact, I'm starting to become convinced that we don't. It feels like Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward are our two biggest beacons of hope, Mel, but I'm not totally certain that either of those guys is viewed as anywhere close to where we had with three at minimum quarterbacks last year, and maybe four for those that liked at least one of J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, or Michael Penix Jr.
Yeah, somebody, guys, is going to talk themselves into taking a quarterback higher than maybe they're rated. I think certainly higher than they're rated by you and I, Field. I think Carolina picking one. You look at Tennessee picking two. Will Levis is banged up now with the shoulder, behind that line that has a problem at that right tackle spot. That's an iffy situation with him. How good can he be the rest of the way to show Callahan that I'm your guy when he had his moments early on, but he had those fatal mistakes in a couple games, but he's only had 13 starts in his career, 14 starts. So Carolina, Tennessee, the Jets, let's see what New Orleans does at 6. Certainly the Vegas Raiders at 7 will go quarterback. You get down to the Giants at 9. So all these teams, Giants tried to trade up for Drake May, unsuccessful, ended up with Malik Neighbors. These teams are going to be in a position by late April to talk themselves into one or two of these quarterbacks. Shedeur Sanders, certainly, and Cam Ward. Cam Ward has a schedule that's been very favorable. Certainly Shedeur now, really from the last few weeks through the rest of the season, are teams he should be able to handle, or they should be able to block up front, which will give him a chance to do what he does best, throw the football. And obviously from that pocket, make those decisions and process. So I think when you look at those two, they won't be in the top 10 for rating, at least for me, Field. Can't speak for you, but they won't have a top 10 rating, but they're going to go in the top 10. They're going to probably go in the top 5. they're going to get forced up there. And people say, well, it's going to be a kind of year like Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis. No, it's not. It's not going to be Kenny Pickett
than
going
that,
20 and Malik Willis going third round behind Ritter. This is going to be a year where these guys are going to go way up there because we have all those teams in the top 10 needing a quarterback. And Sanders and Ward have ability. Now, the key is how quickly can they show they can be great? And this is the problem in the NFL right now. When you watch these games and people say, well, he didn't do this, he didn't do that, he didn't make that throw. And you're asking decent to good to be great. And when that doesn't happen, they stink. So we don't sit with decent to good and say they're decent to good. When they don't play to the level of the elite or make those types of plays that then they're no good. We got to get them out of here. So we're looking for grand slams and home runs with singles and doubles. And that's the problem the NFL has right now. Can Shedeur be a home run? I think he could. Shedeur, and I think we said this, Tom Brady's going to be influential with the Raiders. The Raiders thought they were going to get a quarterback last year, picking with a 13. They didn't get Michael Penix Jr., who they targeted. They sat where they were, and they were all gone. They're going to be aggressive and get a quarterback. They have to. Doubt. They're in a division with Mahomes and Herbert. Now, Bo Nix, we'll see what he develops into, but the AFC in general, loaded with great quarterbacks and loaded with the best of all time in your division, they got to do it. So they're going to go, I think, hard for Shedeur. I think the Vegas Raiders go hard for Shedeur. Somebody else is going to take Cam Ward. Drew Aller, Penn State's only 20 years of age. Now he has the injury, iffy for the Ohio State. We'll see if he plays. He needs to go back. Jalen Milroe, Alabama, needs to go back. Okay. Yeah. Garrett Nussmeier, LSU, 1-year starter, needs to go back. Okay. So some of these guys go back, get as much collegiate experience as you can. But I think Shedeur and Cam Ward will get forced up into that top 5.
I'll say this too, is I think back to last year, and there were times last year where it felt like we got to the stage of nitpicking Drake May. Drake May's film as a redshirt freshman in 2022 was vastly superior to any quarterback in this year's class. Vastly. It wasn't as great last year when they did not have the same weapons around him. Tez Walker didn't get to play until the middle of the season. The offensive line wasn't the same. No Josh Downs, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, if you take the 5 players on my big board that topped the big board last year, Drake May was 5th. 4th was Malik Neighbors / Marvin Harrison Jr. It was kind of a coin toss, right? And then Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. I think all 5 of those guys had higher draft value than any player in this year's class. Travis Hunter has the best chance to crack that top 5, and maybe he would. But those 5 guys last year felt close to nothing can't miss in the NFL draft. We've learned that lesson way too many times, where you felt like throughout the process, the floor for these guys is no lower than like pick 6 or something like that. It just has a very different feel for it at the top of this year's draft class, specifically because of the quarterbacks.
That's such an interesting point that you make, Field. And it's actually, I'm making a mental note, and Joe, our producer, we should actually turn this into the primary conversation topic for one of our podcasts one week, because what you're describing, Field, is accurate, but it's also not significant to the extent that teams are not deciding between this year's players and last year's players. You have the 4th pick in this draft, and you have the options that exist this year only. So it doesn't really make any difference if this is a strong class or a weak class. Right. It does, however, impact how high up you push the quarterback. So I'm just looking at a question right here at SportsFan28. And remember, you can tweet us on Twitter X your questions. Use the hashtag #FirstDraft. Asking, is Carson Beck still a first rounder? Mel, you're talking about guys getting pushed up. Is Carson Beck going to go, and all said and done, is Carson Beck going to go in the first round?
It's iffy right now, very iffy right now, whether he will. He's got to do some things late in the year. He's going to have a chance for Georgia. They're going to be in playoffs to see what he can do there. One of the biggest of stages. I think that Milroe has work to do. We said Ewers and Beck have work to do. Milroe, to me, has to go back. To Field's point about, the nitpicking of Drake May, what that was, Field, that was because we were trying to figure out Jaden Daniels, who had moved from a 4th rounder up to the top part, and Caleb Williams, who had some games where it wasn't as good as he was the previous year. So we were trying to figure out the ranking of those 3. So when you nitpick, you're trying to differentiate between 3 guys, and it fell Caleb, Jaden, and Drake. So that was no criticism of Drake. He was a highly rated guy, but you were trying to separate 3 players at that point. So you try to figure out, well, who's more deserving of being 2 or 3, and it ended up being Jaden at 2, and then Drake at 3. In this particular case, when you look at where we are right now, and you go back, as Greeny was saying, into history, it's tricky with quarterbacks. Okay, we talk about spooky and Halloween. It's tricky. It's a weird deal. It's no perfect formula, because I go back to Parcells. When Bill Parcells was at Miami, it was a draft class where Jake Long went number 1 to Miami, and they didn't take the quarterback that everybody said, take Matt Ryan. But Matt Ryan didn't scream to everybody, I'm franchise material. He said, I'm going to be a good, solid quarterback. He was better than good and solid. He was a heck of a quarterback, right?
NFL MVP.
Matt Ryan, he didn't take Matt Ryan. Why? Because he said, I can get this experienced quarterback from Michigan, teammate of Jake Long's in the second round, and Chad Henne. So he got a little cute, thought he could get both the left tackle and the quarterback, but do it in a different way. But he passed on Matt Ryan and ended up with Chad Henne. How'd that work out? So again, it's not easy. It's not easy. And to Greeny's point, you got to be lucky with the draft class you need that quarterback in. And I said it all along. Nobody could have been more fortunate than the Indianapolis Colts when Peyton Manning went back and ended up being the Colts picking number 1. Okay, because they got Peyton Manning sitting there. Now, a lot of people said they could have taken Ryan Leaf. That was the debate then. Remember, people now want to do a revisionist history. There was a 50-50 split in the league between Manning and Leaf then. Okay, so again, that wasn't easy, but they took Peyton Manning. It was a year where they needed a quarterback. They took him. It was the right guy. This year, maybe Shedeur. Maybe Shedeur is Matt Ryan. Okay, Shedeur could be Matt Ryan in this draft very easily. So, but there's going to be mixed opinion on whether he's going to be franchise, elite, or he's just going to be decent to good. And that's the issue we get into every year. This is the toughest, the most important position in all sports, and it's the toughest position to evaluate in all sports.
And Field, I would button up this part of the conversation with this. I don't ever want to sort of tread into you guys' area. You are evaluators, you're analysts, you are scouts. I'm just a host, but I watch the games. I'm trying to figure out, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, if someone takes Quinn Ewers high in this draft, what are they seeing, Field, that I'm not? Because when I watch Texas play, I find it very, I at times I find myself thinking, why are we talking about this player? There was a moment in time we were talking about him going in the top 10 of the draft. Field, what are people going to talk themselves into? And again, look, there's a lot of season left. God bless the kid. Maybe he winds up having a magnificent run. But if it was happening right now, what would people be talking themselves into that would make them say, I'm taking Quinn Ewers in the first half of the first round?
Yeah, I don't think it's the first half of the first round, because if it is, I think it's crazy. Let me say this. I believe there are haves and have-nots amongst play callers and offensive minds in the NFL. You gave Sean McVay any of these quarterbacks, I'd give him a chance. You know, I have that much confidence and belief in Sean McVay. We saw him resurrect Baker Mayfield on 2 days of practice work, 0 days of practice work when they claimed him off of waivers from the Panthers and they beat the Raiders that night. Baker has gone on to have this incredible success. Kevin O'Connell, and the way he's extracted the very best version of Sam Darnold so far this season. So I have belief in play callers that if they landed, meaning these quarterbacks landed with one of those brilliant offensive play callers, I'd have more confidence. But situation is so important to the success of these players. If somebody is using a first-round pick on a Quinn Ewers or a Carson Beck right now, it's finding the few games, because there have been some during their career, right? I mean, Quinn Ewers, to his credit, last year makes the college football playoff, right? I mean, they have a toe-to-toe game in the college football semifinals with Michael Penix Jr. and the Washington Huskies. This year, on the road, Michigan, who at the time we still believe had a chance to be one of the maybe 10 or 12 best teams in the country with this defense that is very, very talented, goes there, they win decisively. You see some of the in-pocket navigation. He's a guy that has the capacity to throw from a lot of different arm angles. There are some good traits there. I just think the full package leaves so much to be desired that I'm sitting here right now. I thought maybe there was a chance this was going to be a yellow light draft for quarterbacks, right? Like you can find the right spot for these players and talk yourself into it. I think we might have entered red light territory with maybe all but 2 of these quarterbacks in the first round.
And just to define what Field's saying about how tough it is to evaluate quarterbacks, how about coming out of high school? When coming out of high school, Quinn Ewers was rated ahead of Caleb Williams, Drake May, and J.J. McCarthy. So that's what people saw coming out of high school. To your point, it's not easy. It's tough to evaluate high school to college, college to pro. Now there's snapshots. There's instances, there's games where Quinn Ewers, the Alabama game 2 years ago, goes down to Tuscaloosa to Bryant-Denny Stadium and he lights it up. Nick Saban, great defensive genius, best head coach of all time, didn't have an answer for Quinn Ewers. Threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, they win the game. Bottom line is, I think when you look at where we are right now with quarterbacks and you say, okay, where's Quinn Ewers? Where's the rest of the quarterbacks? They're still to be determined in a lot of respects, because still to be determined. But I think when you look at where we are in terms of the quarterbacks at the top, it is right now, I think, Shedeur and Cam Ward. Now, There's still going to be some instances where people are going to throw Garrett Nussmeier's name in. Garrett Nussmeier started one season. He had the great first half, second half didn't go as well. He's had inconsistencies, thrown a lot of interceptions. Okay. So another year, I would say to any college quarterback, unless you're the number one pick and you're ready mentally and physically, and you've done enough, and 1 year is not enough, stay as long as you can. Peyton did it. Eli did it. Stay as long as you can, because they're not developing quarterbacks in the NFL. You cannot make progress if you're ruined mentally and physically by criticism. Okay. You cannot make progress if once you lose your confidence as a young quarterback, you're done. You're done. And I see that happening with young quarterbacks in the NFL. Confidence is gone. So we are not developing they are not developing quarterbacks. The National Football League is not. So stay as long as you possibly can. I heard David Cutcliffe, who did a great job. Ole Miss, great job at Duke, right? Heck of a job. I heard him over the weekend, this past weekend, say in an interview, he advised Peyton and Eli, don't pick places, okay? Pick people. Pick people over places. And that's what he's talking about, the people who are going to be around you with that organization. And what are they going to do? To your point, Phil, a quarterback can be awful here. He can stink, okay? And the words of everybody in the media, all the fans, he stinks. But he can go somewhere else and be pretty doggone good. And he can, all those people say he stinks, wish they had him back. So that's what happens when you have the right people. As David Cutcliffe told them, pick people, not places.
Well, and so that then brings us to the next tweet we have from Twitter X. And this one is from a user whose handle is at ESPN Greeny. I'm not sure if he knows anything about what he's talking about.
He does.
But
he sure does.
When the news about Anthony Richardson getting benched came out, he tweeted, Anthony Richardson should never have been starting to begin with. Everyone, literally everyone, said he needed time when he came out. So this was a predictable result. Let's hope they haven't completely ruined his psyche, because the talent is otherworldly. And guys, I'll start with you, because you and I were sitting there, and you and Lewis and Booger, in every conversation we had leading up to that draft, and then the night of that draft, said whoever takes Anthony Richardson has to be patient. He has played so little in college. The need for development is so overwhelming. The skill set, the talent is maybe on a par with anything that we've literally ever seen, but it's going to take some time. And what did they do? They started him week 1 of his rookie year. He got hurt. He comes back now. It looks a little bit messy. Team isn't really helping him around him. And now the world is ready to give up on him. And there are taglines on shows like Get Up that say, is Anthony Richardson a bust? Yes. Mel, what are your thoughts?
I remember talking to Dan Orlovsky, Greeny and Field, prior to the year when Anthony Richardson was starting at Florida for the first time and they were playing Utah. And I remember talking to Dano, and that's before I said, if he plays a great year, people are going to look at with that arm talent. He'd be looking at number 1 pick in the draft. And that night, he goes out against Utah, and he's awesome. Off the charts great. Yeah. He's phenomenal. I remember Dano was saying during that game, oh my gosh, you could be looking at that guy. The next week, I believe they played Kentucky, and he was like 40%. It wasn't the same quarterback. And he had some spotty moments, some inconsistent moments. He throws some great moments and some moments where, boy, some of those, he was missing layups. And I said on draft day, if you remember, Greeny, I said, if I were Anthony Richardson's advisor, I would say, call the people, talk to Josh Allen and say, Josh, who righted the ship? Who took you from at Wyoming where you had some accuracy issues with some throws? I love Josh Allen, but he did have to clean some things up. He cleaned everything up. How did you do that? And Josh worked with people. Remember, he had his group of people that worked with him mechanically, did some things to get everything tied together properly, changed some things. Even Josh, I look back at that Wyoming take, it's kind of cringy because I was throwing some passes. Who did Josh work with? I said that when Anthony Richardson was selected. He should call Josh, find out who those people are, and go work with them and try to fix those issues, because that's the problem right now. The talent's there. There's no question about it. He needs time, hopefully mentally, like we've seen. I see that even with Levis. I was getting beat up mentally, with the criticism and all the mistakes and the quarter. You had a quarterback coach, supposedly a great quarterback guru. Callahan came from Cincinnati with Burrow. Well, Burrow, I think we could all coach Burrow. I don't know, but Burrow's pretty doggone good. He had a lot of help there. When you need some help, who are you going to get it from? But you got to have the back of your quarterback. When a quarterback makes mistakes, you got to be there and say, hey, played really well. He made a young mistake. I didn't hear that in Tennessee. I didn't hear he played really well in that game, but he made that one mistake. But that's what happens when you're young. That was initially, that wasn't the case. Now you're trying to backtrack when the confidence is already lost. You got to have, that's why it's important. GM, coach, to draft, GM and coach, to draft that quarterback. And then Josh Allen had some rough moments early on with Brian Daboll. I mean, go back to Daboll, even at second, third. There were some moments where Josh would make those head-scratching throws. Okay. I heard what Tom Brady said during that game against Seattle, what Josh was early on. And that's true. I mean, Josh would tell you, hey, I some great moments. I'm leaping over the guy in the Minnesota game where he's doing the leap. And then he comes back the next week against Green Bay and he's at 35, 40%. So that's the nature of what happens with young quarterbacks. But when you are all invested, 1,000%, I go back to, I'm 1984. I'm talking to the Boomer. I think I was a reject. I was a reject. I could have been there. Said, get him off the air. He stinks. Well, people work with you. You get more experience. You evolve. You develop. That person you saw back in 84 is not the person you saw in 86, 87, 88. That's what quarterbacks need. They need to have somebody that has their back and allows them to develop and progress. And we're not getting that in the NFL right now. I mean, look at all the young quarterbacks over the last 3 years that were taken. They're not even with the team that drafted them. I mean, come on. I mean, this is what we're. So I guess you have to. We always say adapt or die. I'm trying to adapt to this. I can't. I've been doing this since 1978, 79. I can't adapt to this. I can't wrap my arms around it. You have to, I guess. It's just unfortunate, and that's what we're dealing with in the NFL right now. So I think we've covered it enough to say, we are not. And I go back to a comment was made today. Well, Jaden Daniels looks better than Caleb Williams. Dan Marino looked better than John Elway as a rookie. Okay. I'm in Baltimore. I saw John Elway struggle when he came to Memorial Stadium and played the Colts. Steve DeBerg got that win when John Elway got hurt with an ankle. Dan Marino's lighting it up after week 6, and he's doing great things. They should have taken Dan Marino. It's better than Elway. I heard people say Steve Walsh was better than Troy Aikman when they were together in Dallas early on. How'd that work out? So again, snap judgments, quick judgment, overreactions early in a career aren't always accurate. Okay. So this is what we have to always go back into history. History allows you to predict the future. I go back to Aikman and Walsh. I go back to the comments about Elway and Marino that same year. And, hey, Marino was a great quarterback. Was he John Elway? No. Marino, 5 Super Bowls, 1, 2, MVP of the last game he played in the NFL. In the Super Bowl. So again, let's let it play out. We don't let it play out a quarterback anymore. By the time we're getting it played out, that quarterback's with his second or third team, and he's been told he stinks.
Let me ask you a question, Mel, quickly.
Mm-hmm.
If the NFL draft were held on January 1st last year, as opposed to April 26th or whatever it was when Anthony Richardson was the 4th overall pick, how high does he go in your opinion?
It's a good question.
Here's the reason why I bring that up. Yeah, that's an impossible question for you to answer on the spot. But here's why I bring that up. The 4-month gap between the end of the college football regular season and the NFL draft allows NFL teams to talk themselves into the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
If you watched Anthony Richardson as a player at Florida, and Greeny, you already alluded to this in your tweet, and you thought that kid was anywhere close to being ready to play in the NFL, you were fooling yourself. Or you don't have scouting eyes. That's just the bottom line. There's no two ways about it. But what happens after the college football season is over? We go to Indianapolis and guys take off their pads and their helmets and they run in t-shirts and shorts. And Anthony Richardson, it turns out, might be the most athletic quarterback to ever be drafted. That sounds like hyperbole. I'm not sure it is. 6'4", 244 pounds. Sorry, 6'5", 244 pounds with a 4.43 40. That is like Cam Newton with better speed. That's how incredibly gifted he is. But if you watched him play, you're sitting there and you're saying to yourself, how could this guy be a first-round pick? And instead, we have these 4 months where we agonize over things that probably don't matter as much as the tape does, and we talk ourselves into players. Here is the problem that I believe the Colts have backed themselves into right now in Indianapolis. Part of the appeal to Indy, on top of some of the stuff that I just mentioned, this incredible physical stature, is, hey, we've got a pretty good team. Right? This offensive line that we felt confident about for a few years. Michael Pittman Jr. We traded for DeForest Buckner prior to that. We've got this defense that's got some building block pieces. So on the one hand, we get this quarterback right, we could be zooming up in a hurry up the standings. We got Jonathan Taylor, by the way, as well. Maybe the best running back in the NFL at the time that they drafted Anthony Richardson. Here's the problem with that, though, is if the quarterback doesn't hit in a hurry, you got the rest of the locker room that is sitting there saying, you want me to waste prime years of my career to allow this kid to develop? What if he doesn't? Because if he doesn't, and you sat there and you allowed me to go from age 25 to 28, or if you're a guy a little bit older like DeForest Buckner, 28 to 30, and all I get rewarded, yes, I'm getting paid, obviously, very handsomely. But guys, yes, it's nice to get paid. They want to win too. It's the locker room you're dealing with. I was talking, I don't think he'd be uncomfortable with me sharing this. I was talking with Booger about this. Booger, who, of course, a high-profile first-round pick, won multiple Super Bowls. This guy's got the pulse of the locker room. He really does. And he knows that just because I'm not the quarterback, it doesn't mean that my feelings towards winning don't matter. They do matter. It was a very fine line that Indianapolis tried to navigate. And because these owners are ready to fire head coaches and GMs with one snap of the fingers, we don't get these long leashes for players. We are not in a climate right now where young quarterbacks who need time to develop are going to get it. So teams better start adjusting accordingly.
I have right here in front of me, Greeny and Field. These are the updated rankings board, right? I do this every week, Field. You do. I've been doing it since August.
Yep.
And you asked a question about, I'd have to go back. And I think I don't want to just throw out, stuff that's not accurate. You want to get the accurate. It would be, I will have it next week. We'll see where we were at various stages with these quarterbacks in terms of a rating, because it is important. And I do agree. Pro days are a joke. Pro days for quarterbacks are a joke. Why do we care? And a lot of teams already know going into that pro day, they go there just to show up. So it looks like they're not giving away who they really like. But what is a pro day for a quarter? What is I told you, two worst pro days that I can remember were Teddy Bridgewater and Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
Teddy Bridgewater was okay. Peyton Manning, great. Peyton Manning had a terrible pro day. Who was the best pro day ever? Jamarcus Russell. Okay. And we go on and Zach Wilson and all these different guys, because you can throw it all over the yard. Pro days are a joke. Okay. But I will say this, you go back to the problem of evaluating and developing quarterbacks. Troy Aikman, Peyton Manning said, you're better playing through your mistakes. You learn by playing. Well, not in this league anymore. You don't, because if you're making mistakes, you're done. You can't make mistakes. You can't be playing like a rookie anymore. So that notion, well, you can play through them. Jordan Love sat for how many years? How many years did Aaron Rodgers sit? Mahomes sat for a year. There's again, to my point about no perfect formula. There's no perfect formula how to rank them. There's no perfect formula how to develop them. What's going to happen once they start and finish? Some guys look better early than late. There's nothing perfect about this. It's very difficult, but what's in place now is not working. And teams are never going to learn from it, because you had that difference of opinion. Let them play. Anthony Richardson's got to play. He's going to, but what's happening now is what we're seeing. The mental destruction of a quarterback who is mentally tough enough, who doesn't listen to radio shows, TV, talk shows, read the paper now, the internet, who doesn't go on the internet, who doesn't hear and see all this stuff, this negativity, to let them destroy. And I said, I get the articles, feel like you do, after the draft. Kiper stinks, get him out. I always said, Kiper's great, Kiper stinks. I don't want to hear the good and the bad. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear anything good. I don't want to hear anything bad, because it affects you. But can these players have that discipline to say, I don't want to hear it? It's tough not to let the noise destroy you. And that's what's happening in the NFL right now.
And once again, 3 of the 4 top quarterbacks taken in the 2023 class have been benched. Bryce Young went number 1 overall. He started 21 games. Anthony Richardson went number 4 overall. He has started 10 games. And Will Levis went number 33 overall. He has started 14 games. Okay, so those are for the quarterbacks. Let's get back to what we were planning on doing today before the benching of Anthony Richardson, and that's more day one names you need to know. We had some last week. In the interest of time, we didn't get to as many as we wanted, so let's keep going with names that we are certain we are going to hear on Thursday night, the first night of the draft in Green Bay. Mel, I'll start with you on the defensive tackle out of Ole Miss.
Yeah, Walter Nolen. I'll tell you what, you look at a kid with talent. He's number 1 on the board coming out. Now, he had an injury, 15 seconds left in the first half, left that game with a left knee injury. Now, we'll see moving forward. But when he's been on his game, you go back to the game, South Carolina, Kentucky, he's dominant. And you can move him around. He presents scheme versatility, the defensive line coach. He's got awesome talent. This kid is a disruptive, destructive player when he is on top of his game, when you see Walter Nolen at his best. Now, there's some inconsistencies there. Bottom line is the talent is undeniable. So I think for Walter Nolen, he's only 21 years of age, super highly rated coming out of high school, was at Texas A&M, now at Ole Miss. This is a kid that I think can be a real factor, because in the NFL, you just can't stay at home. You got to get in the backfield. You got to wreak some havoc, and you got to have some versatility. He does field. I think he's an interesting guy. Before I get to Aireontae Ersery, the offensive tackle, left tackle of Minnesota, 40 career starts. He's going to end up with 39 at left tackle, 1 at right tackle early in his career, 6'6", 330, javelin, discus, shot putter in high school, all those different things he did. And I think what about Ersery, Usually when you're 6'6", 330, the smaller guys get under you. They're tough to remember. Jonathan Ogden had trouble with Dwight Freeney. I see Ersery with the bend he has, with the ability he has, keeping those guys at bay. So there's a kid that I think factors in heavily on the O-line, and certainly Walter Nolen, defensive tackle, Ole Miss on that side of the ball.
Yeah, Walter Nolen can be as good as he wants to be. We've seen it in a couple games recently too, by the way. That LSU offensive line, I'll get into them in just a little bit. They had no answer for him. When he's pass rushing, the force he plays with, the way that he can disrupt the interior pocket. I mean, we know that obviously the edge rushers are usually the best pass rushers on the team and often the highest paid. But I think the hardest way for quarterbacks to get the football on time and out with accuracy as well is when they're under duress right in front of them, because it's the fastest, most direct route to the passers. So Walter Nolen, a guy who came into college with all sorts of accolades, has kind of put it together of late for Ole Miss.
All right, and then Field, let's go. It feels like every year since I've been doing this, Penn State has had an edge rusher that we are talking about in the draft, and here comes another.
Yeah, and by the way, this one has sort of the same path that Micah Parsons did as well. That's obviously a lofty comparison for Abdul Carter, but a guy who last year, when Penn State had two guys who both went in the first 3 rounds, Chop Robinson with, was it 21 overall, Mel? Wherever it was, 21 overall to Miami last year. So there's been a lot of pedigree within this Penn State rushing family. But because of the depth at pass rusher last year, Abdul Carter was a stand-up inside linebacker for a lot of snaps last season. This year, he moves to a more prominent edge rushing role, and he's been rock solid. 4 sacks already this season, forced a fumble. To me, one of the 5 or 6 best players in this entire class. A freaky athlete. I mean, his ability to bend the edge in a hurry makes him just a nightmare to try to block. He is going to be the kind of guy that on any sort of obvious passing situation, the defense is going to have to account for very, very, very quickly. On top of that, because of the fact that he does have snaps as a stand-up inside linebacker as well, he's got positional versatility. He can drop into coverage if a defensive coordinator wanted to get nuts. That's the kind of skill set that Abdul Carter brings to the table. One of the most versatile and explosive defensive players in the entire draft class this year.
And Ohio State, guys, has a problem. That game, Happy Valley, Ohio State has a big problem at left tackle with Josh Simmons getting hurt a couple weeks ago. Josh Simmons was an outstanding player. He's still, I'm keeping him. He's on the top 25 big board. He is it could have been as high as 12 to 15 after all was said and done. Unfortunately, out for the rest of the year with that injury. Left tackle was a big problem against Nebraska last week. Donovan Jackson's going to probably have to kick out there from guard to tackle. You're dealing with Penn State, multiple pass rushers off the edge, led by Abdul Carter. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle that, because when Will Howard was pressured, you'll see some mistakes maybe happening. So that clean pocket that Josh Simmons, the left tackle, was providing and allowing to happen with him gone, that's one of the most significant injuries. We've had a ton of guys get hurt this year, unfortunately. That's one of the most significant, is Josh Simmons, left tackle from Ohio State, not available to play the rest of this year.
Going forward, looking at your tweets using the hashtag #FirstDraft, Evil Inside has a question about offensive linemen. And Mel, I'll throw this one to you for your next lock first rounder, because as one who went to Northwestern, when I'm looking for offensive linemen, I always look to the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I think Ersery's the guy. I touched on him when I was talking about Walter. Aireontae Ersery is the right guy. I mean, I know all, but we know Kelvin Banks from Texas, Will Campbell, LSU, and Josh Simmons would have been probably ahead of him coming out of Ohio State, but he's got the injuries dealing with now with the knee. Ersery, to me, with the experience field that he has, and that's a critical thing. When you're coming into the NFL with 40 starts, which is what he'll be at, barring injury, 40 career starts, all but one at left tackle, and you have that kind of experience, it bodes well. When you're that big and that athletic and you can move defenders, very consistent in pass pro. He was a dominant run blocker. There's a couple games he was falling off some blocks, but he's gotten better of late. This kid, to me, stick out there at left tackle, and you got a guy for a long, long time protecting the blind side of your quarterback. He's not perfect, but he, to me, is deserving of being in that mid-first round discussion.
And Mel, by the way, he's just a hard guy to get around, right? Just the physical. He's got the length that, like, even if you have a rusher with power who can meet his power, he's just a hard guy to get your hands underneath, just because he's got these go-go gadget arms to work with as well. But I got another offensive tackle.
Yeah, the other offensive tackle, and Mel mentioned him, is Will Campbell. I'm already looking forward to the debates between those two guys and you two guys over who's the best tackle in the class, right?
Yeah, and I'll still hold steady on Kelvin Banks from Texas. I think Mel does as well. Are you still Kelvin Banks at the top, Mel? But that next one, and I'll be honest with you, I think Will Campbell goes in the first round. This guy, he's a 20-year-old left tackle who started day one at LSU. He's played for a ton of high leverage moments. I mean, the guy protected Jaden Daniels' blindside for a couple of seasons. Like, Will has been through the ringer now. Like, it's not as in the SEC, no less. It's not like this guy is not battle tested. Here is what I come down to fundamentally with Will Campbell. The feet remind me a little bit of Troy Fautanu last year from Washington. This guy moves his feet like he's a linebacker back there. He is unbelievably quick and nimble. Laterally, so impressive. The capacity to match and mirror pass rushers. Really, really good. Here's what I can't figure out yet. Does he have enough lead in the trunk right now? Is this guy going to be able to, when a defender does get underneath him? Because unlike Aireontae Ersery, I don't think Will Campbell has elite length. His arms, I think, are somewhere in the 32 to 32 and 3/4 inch length, which I know there are people out there that are like, give me some perspective. 34 and above, we're talking business. 33 and above, usually good enough. Under 33, a little bit of a question mark in the scouting community. He doesn't have the raw power that some of the other offensive tackles do. So good, can be so good in pass protection. Can certainly do a great job of just sort of guiding defenders up the field past the quarterback when they don't engage him with power. But that's why I can't get to like top 10 overall pick right now with Will Campbell. 15 to 20, I think I probably could get there. But if he puts some more just weight in his backside somewhere, he might be in good shape, Mel.
Yeah, I think Josh Simmons was ready to possibly overtake him. He's at 15. Campbell is. Simmons, even right now, I'm sitting there at 23. I could even keep him right where he was because we have to wait and see on the medical of these players that were hurt. I'm keeping them where they were. You think about all the players that were banged up this year. I think I have right now, that's 7 in the top 25 have had injuries at some point. Wow. Some are out for the year, some aren't, but they've been guys that have been beat up. Michael Williams coming back now, looking like he's going to finish off strong. So that's been a year really affected at a lot of positions, not other than that, like I said, that left tackle spot for Ohio State with the great Josh Simmons going down.
Well, this is where I learned so much because I perceive these guys a certain way, and then I get to ask the questions. Between them, Ersery and Campbell have started 13 games. They've allowed a combined total of 2 sacks. Yeah. So I perceive both of them to be locked first-round picks, and that's why we have the conversation. Mel, next we go to Michigan's tight end.
Colston Loveland. You say the quarterback has been a big problem at Michigan. You knew it would be with J.J. McCarthy moving on and a big problematic area. He's still catching the football, and he had the shoulder injury, missed the USC game, came back from that, had a drop, a concentration drop in a couple games, one here, one there. That's it. This kid can stretch the deep middle like no other. He's only 20 years of age. The kid is a dynamic performer, and he has been. Jim Harbaugh obviously loves the tight end position. He had Colston Loveland there. He had A.J. Barner there, who transferred into Michigan. Colston Loveland, his skill set screams, I'm going to be a major contributor. I'm going to be a fantasy league guy. I'm going to catch touchdown passes. We see what Brock Bowers is doing for the Raiders. Colston Loveland, man, he's got a hold of Tyler Warren. I talked about last week at Penn State. What a great talent he is. They did a story on him on ESPN.com. I think Jake Trotter did today on ESPN.com. Tyler Warren is a special entity. There's a lot of tight ends, H-backs in this draft that are pretty doggone good. Okay. So there's going to be a lot of talent at that spot. But I think when you look at it right now, it's going to be a battle royal between Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland to see who will be tight end number 1.
Yeah, I could throw Mason Taylor in there as like sort of like creeping behind those two guys as well. I love myself some Mason Taylor, but Warren just so physical. The guy refuses to go down on first contact. And obviously Colston Loveland, just an incredible athlete. And speaking of incredible athletes, Greeny, we've mentioned Jalon Walker from Georgia on this podcast before, but I just want to reiterate him because every time that I turn on the tape of Jalon Walker or just watch Georgia on TV, he just screams the potential for being a top 10 or 15 pick in this upcoming draft. Still don't know exactly what his best position will be in the NFL. So he, like Abdul Carter, who I was talking about a little while ago, has played significant snaps, both as a stand-up inside linebacker and also as an edge player. I think there's some concerns if he's a full-time edge, does he have the requisite length or is he going to get swallowed up a little bit in the running game? But if you get him in obvious passing situations and let him just pin his ears back and run, good luck finding a way to slow this guy down. And as a stand-up inside linebacker, the instincts are so good. Sideline to sideline range. I always put a little bit more stock into stand-up inside linebackers and secondary players in the Kirby Smart defense because there's a whole lot of responsibility that is on the plate for those players. So Jalon Walker's already got 4.5 sacks this year, nearly matching his total of 5 from last season. To me, just continues to go arrow up. And obviously with Georgia playing great defensive football right now, he and Michael Williams certainly have the makings of the two players from the same school that maybe are most likely, along with Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter, to go in the first 15 picks.
You're going to have three Georgia Bulldog defensive players, guys. Malachi Starks, the great safety. Certainly Michael Williams and Jalen Walker. Jalen Walker's at 10 now on the big board. Malachi Starks is at 8, and Michael Williams is at 4. Jalen Walker, biggest games is where he shows up the most. I mean, you go back to the Clemson game, the Texas game. Jalen Walker's all over the field making plays, and that versatility to be off ball or outside coming off the edge is going to bode well for him by the time we get to late April.
Yeah. Okay. So the second to last thing we're going to do today, and I'm saving my cute little one for the finish, but the second to last thing we're going to do is we're going to name our Orange Crushers. So Mel, you are the world's foremost authority on the Orange Crush, your beverage of choice, and you and I have a wager going. We bet some Orange Crushes on the Colorado players in the draft this year, and we'll see how that one plays out. But Orange Crushers are going to be the opposite of first round locks. Give me a player, Mel, we'll call him your Orange Crusher, who isn't on everybody's board, a name that everyone doesn't know, but that they absolutely should, who you think as we work our way through this process is going to be on that rocket ship up in the draft.
Well, you remember Johnny Newton from Illinois last year, with Washington Commanders, right? His younger brother, Jalon Newton, is at Toledo. And the Mid-American Conference has churned out a lot of receivers over the years. You go back to Greg Jennings. You go back to Deontay Johnson, now a Baltimore Raven out of Toledo, Corey Davis, Antonio Brown. Julian Edelman was a quarterback at Kent State, became a slot receiver. But the bottom line is Jalon Newton, you look at what he's done over the last 4 games, he's been spectacular. And he's a guy who can get down the field, make the catch. After the catch, he's dynamic. This is a kid, mechanical engineering major, smart kid, loves to play the game, plays physical. Again, you look at the last 4 games. Bowling Green, he has 9 catches for 164 yards and 2 touchdowns. Okay. No, Northern Illinois, 3 for 64 and a touchdown. Buffalo games, 7 for 159. Miami, Ohio, 8 for 127. And guess what? He said, well, that's Mid-American Conference. During his career, 2022, he had a touchdown reception against Ohio State. 2023, a touchdown catch against Johnny Newton's Illini. So Jalon Newton, love the kid, what he can do, because he is a fear factor player coming out of the Mid-American Conference from that Toledo Rockets program. Really like what I've seen him, particularly the last 4 weeks. And really, once he was healthy, because he had some injuries early on, he has been a dynamic performer in the Mid-American Conference.
By the way, his younger brother, believe it or not, his younger brother, Johnny, is actually, I think, a year younger. Had a great game this past weekend for the Commanders. He is coming on for that defense. I love this. They have, there are 5 brothers in this family. Johnny, but who was actually Jerzon, Jervon, Jerquan, Jerwan, and Jershawn. So all very close in terms of names. Good luck keeping up with all those names at family reunions and things of that nature. Good pick right there by Mel. Mine, William and Mary offensive tackle Charles Grant. I don't know how much time we give to William and Mary on our airwaves here at ESPN, but I do think there's a chance that Charles Grant becomes a name that many who follow the draft are becoming very familiar with as we get closer and closer to the day itself. Charles Grant, this is a traits player, right, Mel? This guy, if you saw him walking around, he is massive. Now, when you're watching tape of William and Mary, you got to factor in that the opponents they're facing off against are not filled with a bunch of SEC edge rushers who look the same physically as what you are seeing from Charles Grant, but a big, physically imposing offensive tackle who's lean as well. He's got to put some more muscle and probably just more weight onto this frame, but super long arms, needs to become a more disciplined pass protector. But just with this sheer size and the developmental upside for a guy who has been in college for 5 years now, so it's not like he is, fresh to the sport or something like that. I think Charles Grant has a chance, and Mel and I were joking about this before the show began about how it's so hard to pin around to a guy. A guy is a first-round pick. You might know a guy is going to have a hard time getting drafted. Everything in between, Green, is really hard to decipher when you're having the conversation on Halloween. But if you told me that Charles Grant worked his way into becoming a 3rd-round pick, we saw this last year. The Bears took a developmental offensive tackle. I'm going to butcher his last name, and I apologize. Kieran Amagaji from Yale, who, by the way, was coming off of a major injury. We see these guys start to come off the board as soon as maybe pick 65, maybe going all the way through a pick 120 or so.
I watched Charles Grant. It was funny. Last week we had Charles Grant, William and Mary, able to watch him. The whole nation was able to watch Charles Grant. They were able to watch Carson Vincent at Alabama A&M, that Alabama State game. So you had a chance to see it. But Charles Grant's the kind of guy athletically field, and you said it, He looks the part that an offensive line coach in the NFL is going to see Charles Grant and say, I can make him. I can mold him into a guy. Watch that number 60 at William & Mary. Boy, he has what you want. And I think offensive line coaches between now and late April will look at that kid, say, yes, he's a little raw. Yes, he needs a little work, but I can do it. I can make him a heck of a player in the National Football League. I think you're right. 3rd, 4th round is probably where he comes off the board.
All right. And then one final thing for today, because as we record this, it is the day before Halloween. As many people are hearing this, it is actually Halloween. And you're both at interesting stages of fatherhood / grandfatherhood. Field, you've got the 2 daughters.
Yep.
Do I have this right? Your elder daughter is 2, right?
Yes.
So,
yep.
So neither of them are really old enough to be able to choose a costume. So I remember that stage. You're deciding what your kids. So what are the 2 Yates daughters going to be for Halloween? And next week, we need photos.
Yeah, the second straight year that we're going to be doing the same costume for each of them. And my older daughter went through a phase, and this is a fairly normal phase to go through for a young child, where she was like a milk addict. We used to joke that we should just buy a cow because we would save money based off of how much milk we were buying from the grocery store. This was after she had moved past the, getting milk from her mother phase of her life. So we are going as cows. All 4 of us actually are going as cows. So we did find costumes. We found costumes that fit each of the 4 of us as well. So she is fired up. We were unable to keep the costume a secret from her prior to today itself. So she did have a chance to try it on, and she loved it so much that she slept in it that night. So it's a cow costume for now, and soon to be an extra set of pajamas.
Okay, very good. And then
fun.
Mel, the granddaughter, of course, is Blakely, who is literally just months old, right? So are we going to dress her up for Halloween?
Where she's 3 months old coming up in another few days. 3 months old. She's amazing. And I wait for Field. Field sends Blakely more gifts than Santa Claus. Okay.
Yeah.
Field's got Blakely with blankets. Blankets phenomenal, by the way, Field. And then you got all kinds of, what's that thing? The snuggle? What's that with the,
Mel
swaddle.
Swaddle is what Mel.
Swaddle.
Yeah.
So that's all. Field's got her also. I'm waiting to see what Field. Probably a Raven type of deal because she's already a huge Ravens fan. As Lauren and Lauren is. Alex is a Steelers
I'm thinking
fan.
of Deontay Johnson Gurley.
Yes. Yeah. So Lauren's Ravens, Alex's Steelers. Can you believe that? Lauren married a Steeler fan. I can't.
I know.
Still can't. So Blakely's going to be split, but Blakely's going to end up being Ravens all the way. You know that. Forget the Steelers. She's going to be Ravens. So yeah. So Blakely may have a Raven type of thing going on there, but at 3 months old, I think next year is when she'll start to get a little serious about Halloween.
All right. So I'm going to make a request. I want for next week's program, Joe, our producer, I want a photo of the Yates family all dressed in milk. And I want a video of Mel swaddling his granddaughter. There's nothing on earth I want to see more than Mel Kiper swaddling Blake.
We would take a Jets win tonight, though, right, Greeny? That might be a close second.
That I've long since given up on that. Listen, there are no miracles. I don't count on those things. Anyway, a very happy Halloween to one and all. Thank you for spending part of your Halloween with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast and tune in every Thursday during the season for full NFL draft analysis, and keep those questions coming on Twitter X using the hashtag #FirstDraft, and then tune in to hear the answers from these 2 men. They are Field Yates and Mel Kiper. I am Greeny, and we'll see you next week.